Welcome to Endtalkers. I'm Elliot Forscheron.
I'm Niniri.
And today we get into that wonderful thing that is in no way terrifying and or foreboding, which is the final days.
Yeah, there's some of the darkest stuff this game has tackled in this section.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other instances of darker moments like Tesleen, obviously, but in terms of pound for pound, just showing you something just truly horrendous. But man, even that, not by much, because effectively, same premise played out slightly differently.
Right, exactly. I mean, some of Vanus Party is probably the most disturbing dungeon instance even that they've ever done.
Ooh, that's a good quandary because I wonder if there are people with specific phobias or fears where others would bug them more. Like I know some people really struggle with Sestasha because the barnacles, but we'll get into it later with Venice Body. I think we talked about this months and months and months ago. But that moment when you get to, I believe, the second or third boss, or no, it's not even one of the bosses. It's that moment with the mother and her children, and you see those flayed Terminus beasts and they turn around for the first time and you realize they're the elephant, the Archosodra faces on them. And it's
Yes.
just, I remember genuinely making like just visceral sounds when I first played that.
Yeah, it was extremely disturbing. It felt like, I mean, since you brought up Tesleen, it does feel like they delivered a lot of the value of the Tesleen scene in miniature in that dungeon.
Yeah. Well, and they do it in such interesting ways because with Thavner especially, they do it in a bunch of vignettes, like moments like the mother and her child, rather than Tesleen, which is so it's a cutscene, so specifically focused on her and her suffering and the gruesome horror, both existentially and physically, of the transformation into a sin eater. But like I think they succeed wildly on the Terminus beasts. But it's interesting because whereas it's a very purely physiological thing with the sin eaters, the doom and dread suffuses the first. In the source, your actual fear, the actual dread is the mechanism.
Right, yeah.
So the first thing we have is we are returning from the moon and we return to Charlian in time to witness the forum announcing the truth of the final days and rescinding the memory slash voice spell that prevents them from sharing that truth.
Yes, we do. A cool moment. I like that kind of magic. I think I mentioned this before, maybe, but the whole like sealing of speech spell. That's like one of my favorite tropes in fantasy. So I was really,
Mhm.
I personally got a lot out of that.
Well, and it's this is when we're starting to get into not quite like obviously still for Chanel standoffish and stuff, but this is the point at which you can have more empathy for the forum and their decisions, like why they would do something like that, even if it's considered morally dubious to use such spells, because from their standpoint, they are having to worry about the existential survival of not just a race, not just races, but the entirety of the star. And so the lengths they've gone to, you can start to have more respect for, rather than just feeling like they're conniving dipshits in the background, unwilling to listen.
Right? Yeah, it turns that trope on its head. As much as the spell may be unethical, they're only using it on themselves for the most part.
Right, which introduces more ambiguity there. They also reference 270 years ago the founding of the, I mean, not the anti-tower, but effectively where the anti-tower will come to be, which is the wellspring that is allows them to access the deeper parts of the ethereal sea, and where they found Hydaelyn.
Just a little research camp at first, and then the anti tower, and then an entire civilization.
Yeah, the entirety of Emporium, or New Charlane, as it's come to be called. It's interesting to me that Hydaelyn did not reach out prior. I guess she would have probably been drained at the time, and so it's only upon them reaching her that she would have done that. It also makes you wonder, flashing forward a bit, with how much we recounted to Vanav what happened in our experience, how much she was aware that what happened with Charlian needed to play out the way it did. Ergo, why she wouldn't have reached out sooner and just bided her time.
Yes, I wonder if it was a mixture of the two. If she couldn't reach out so directly without actually them making contact with the Ethereal Sea. The Ethereal Sea contact seems to be important. Like the Echo doesn't seem to have just been enough on its own.
No. Though the Echo also seems like some kind of booster, or maybe even the Blessing of Light potentially. I mean, Blessing of Light for sure is a booster. We see that explicitly in ARR and elsewhere. But with the Echo and stuff, people had not awakened to that for the most part during the early part of the Sixth Astral Era, which means that it also makes sense that she wouldn't have had vessels like people like Kryl to reach out to as well.
Right, exactly. And also I think I would imagine that Heidelin Vinar would take a cautious approach on who to contact. She's seen what too much knowledge can do in the wrong hands, so she wants to make sure that the people that she's talking to are the right people.
A really interesting notion. I wonder if there have ever been any people throughout time where Hydaelyn tried to provide answers or context or helpful guide, and actually things ended up poorly or going awry. I want, especially, I can imagine something like that happening in the first or second astral eras, where imagine her trying to lead people in the correct path and being more active, and then it all going wrong.
I could absolutely see that being the case. There's so little that we know about some of the early eras, 1, 2, and 4, right?
Yeah, 1, 2, and 4 we know effectively, besides what the element of the calamity is, we know very, very little about.
Right. So I could certainly see something like that happening there. I think that would be really narratively interesting.
It also, I mean, this is purely hypothesis on my side, but if she is the one who created the 12, and the 12 were created seemingly originally to some extent to be interventionist, and then at some point were told, "No, no, 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 okay, never mind that." You have to wonder, I mean, there must have been some growing pains for early Hydaelyn, both the star and the deity, for her role, maybe, potentially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see this in the Loporrits, right? We see that the resources she laid the Loporrits out with were not commensurate to their task necessarily, insofar as understanding the societies they had to interface with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where it's not that I ever need or want more like Vana or Hydaelyn in the story. I think I adore the ending to her tale. It's perfect for me. But dealing more with the legacy and history of her actions is something I'm super interested in. And I think we are kind of already exploring that in things like Pandemonium Mist of the Realm. I mean, Pandemonium isn't really her legacy, but the Unsundered World. So it'll be interesting to see. Speaking of Loporrits and the moon, though, one of the things I really love is that they hearken onto their exodus being like Neoncrump's hope, which it also makes so much sense why they'd be ideologically more willing to do something that's so utilitarian, as well as so let's flee for salvation, because it's the founding of Charlian is rooted in the same fundamental thing. So it's part of their history and their culture, really.
Yeah, and specifically, Neuenkrump's flight from Eorzea was very specifically to avoid an apocalypse. Well, a calamity, which is as close as you get, really. So, yeah, I mean, the contexts are almost exactly the same.
Yeah, I think it's just little details like that. I think they get you to a point where you can, if not empathize, at least deeply understand where the forum is coming from. Little elements like that, even if you aren't aware of the lore, are really great nods to this feeling that there's a contextualized history to their actions, not just the world going to end. We do action. Okay, we were just doing thing without thinking about it. It feels like these characters have thought about it and they just don't believe that there is a better way. And that's why, and we'll get it later in this scene. I think that's one of the beautiful contrasts between the twins and Fortunal, right? Which is that Fortunal's not just afraid to hope. Fortunal truly just believes that hope will only secure doom. Whereas the twins are pragmatic in acknowledging that his course might end up being the right course, but until such time as it is the only course, they're not going to give up.
Well, exactly. Look at the content that we have to go through to defeat. Charlian didn't have access to the Scion, didn't have access to Emmett and Hythlodaeus. We could have failed at many steps there if not for tweaks of luck and of our bonds and of our life experience. The Charlians probably would have failed if they tried to do what we did.
And I think in replaying a lot of the other expansions lately, I think that's just such a reoccurring motif as well, right? Is it's not just that we are the defiers of fate, but we come in and typically what our key element is to do something that truly seemed impossible to inspire people to new or better or different action. And I think that bears out even here with the forum. And I think it bears out in the lovely arc that you have with Fortunel and the twins and where it ends, and in placing his trust and faith in them. I'm excited to talk about it later with the Fortunel and the twins, their reconciliation. But it is someone who has been unwilling to have faith, giving his faith over and entrusting it to another, which is, I think, very powerful.
I completely agree. Yeah, the whole thing with Foshino and his feelings on the matter, I think it's very understandable. And the fact that we learn that the reason that he became so devoted is the birth of his children makes everything fit into context so much more cleanly. You know, his children are born. He obviously falls deeply in love with them as a parent does, and wants to protect them. So he just like winnows away all the soft parts of himself and says, "I'm just gonna be this person who does this.
And I love that they give that moment of realization to the twins. It's not just like a background element where he tells. I mean, he does kind of say it as well later on and during the reconciliation. But even here in this scene, the twins look to each other and are like, "Oh, he started going crazy. He started focusing on his project after they were born. Oh, it was us. It was always us." And so you can feel like they're a step ahead in the emotional development of this plot point compared to Fortunel, because he's still aggro and you're still like, God damn it, man, just let the cold shoulder drop a little bit. But they understand, they now are able to understand him so much better and be less frustrated by their choices. And which is why they come across as so, we understand you, we even support you, but until such time as this has truly come to an end, to ignore those that we could save would not be wisdom, it would be indolence.
I respect the writers for not indulging in something that I think a lesser team would have, where they would have had, Emeliant say something like, almost chide the children for it. Be like, well, your father did this because of this. Shouldn't you feel bad? No, the team gives the twins the space they need to have their own empathy in the situation.
You're right. It's really interesting, and I think 14 does this at least recently, really, really well and quite often. Maybe that's partly just Ishikawa's writing specifically, but it's that to focus on the empathy, right, as tool of understanding rather than revelation of chiding. I think the main place you see chiding come in is particularly is villains. I think you see Emmett does some of that, and some other characters do it, but it really is it really tends to be rooted, right, in characters piecing, not even just piecing it together, because you have Emmett chiding and revealing some information about the nature of the world, right? But then you have characters throughout Shadowbringers meditate on that. And in a similar vein here, I will say the thing too about Fortunel is the fact that they can make a character who you're so frustrated with and angry with upon your first meeting with them, and throughout the majority of Endwalker, and then again, for me, managed to feel like you can textually understand him, can respect his decisions, even if you're frustrated ultimately, and feel like that reconciliation between him and the twins nails it, is just chef's kiss.
Yeah, I mean, completely. The arc around Foshno is really well written. Oh, you know who does chide people a lot? Elidibus.
Yes, yes. Well, you know what's interesting about that though too? I'd have to look really closely at Pandemonium because I think he does do some of this as well later on. But it really seems to be a byproduct though of his weariness, because Themis doesn't necessarily as much. There seems to be a correlation, right, between those who have been worn down by the world and their disposition of chiding and of demeaning, in contrast to those who are still open to the world and empathy. Which I mean is like that makes sense, right? Like broadly, that would make sense that it would be characterized that way.
Yeah, I mean, just to look at Hades and Emmett Selk, those are two very different characters. Speaking in terms of Solus versus, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Unsundered World Emmett Selk versus the Emmett Selk of Solus. We'll say Solus versus.
Yeah, those are two very, very different characters. And obviously, Vanar and Hydaelyn are hugely different characters.
Oh my god, yeah. It's honestly, and part of it's vocal performance, but a lot of it's also writing. The level to which if you go watch Vana scenes and then you contrast them directly against the meeting with Hydaelyn, there's almost a little bit of heartbreaking, at least for me, how different she is, how much the weight of all that she's been through affects her. And it really is similar in comparison to if you compare someone character like Themis versus Elidibus in 5.3.
Yeah, no, I definitely. Well, I mean, there are some very obvious parallels to be drawn there, right? But just based on their nature and their experience, especially Elidibus and Vanar, like more than any other pair of characters.
Mhm. And now we enter the scene where we stand in our room and we see the visions of the final days beginning, the meteors striking, the sky burning red. Very, very, very foreboding.
Yeah, I have little thoughts on each of these visitors. I think they each represent something very different for the characters involved.
Yeah, we got the visitors there, so we should definitely go through them. Do you want to do them in order?
Yeah, which one are we starting with, Alphino?
Is it Alphino's the first? I thought it was Alice was the first one.
We can start with Alice.
Okay, we'll go there. So one thing I just want to say is all of them. Look, I think 14 has done this where there's just always been a lot of room for this. All of them are kind of flirty. I mean, a couple of them are a little less so, but there's like I think there's a lot you can say that's just like a sincerity of sentiment, a sincerity of just earnest appreciation and affection for a friend. But also, especially with some of them, there's some fucking room to imply.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. All of them are. Personally, I don't see it so much with Thancred's one, I'll admit.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But with the other ones, yeah, definitely. Especially like Estinian, Graha, if you have a mummy kink, Ishtola.
I mean, dude, Estinian literally comes into your room. The only one who does that.
Yes.
The fundamental thing I think that they all share, right, is also this a recognition of the Warrior of Light is not invincible, and that it's okay to let your allies stand by you and stand by your side, which becomes hyper relevant, right? Obviously, when we get to Ultimate Thule, but even the journey to there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not just Ultimate Thule, it's relevance. Obviously, that's when it's at its most obvious, but I think it's relevant throughout all of this expansion and most of the last one as well.
We're starting with Alice, and one of the things I want to point out is the song that plays for each of them. But for Alice, you have Flow, which I mean is appropriate because Flow is not only obviously Vana and her promise, Hydaelyn and her promise, and all that stuff, but the musical theme motifs of themes that are used around Charlene are all versions of Flow. So I think that's also why it's harkening to their theme.
Honestly, with this section, I almost see it as like a meditation on Alize grappling with agency and powerlessness.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very a multifaceted song, both for its specific intent coming from Hydaelyn, but also how it gets used for all the different characters, which I freaking love.
Yeah, no, for sure.
She talks to you about Xenos and the body stealing your time in Garlemald, all that stuff. But I think each person has at least one major thing to touch on. And for hers, it's her just being like, you know how much I hate noble sacrifices, and let's avoid acts of gratuitous bravado. And it's just like, ooh, that ends up being very resonant, especially when you get to Ultima Thule. And she basically echoes the same sentiment in her final sacrifice.
And I think this links her whole point with Xenos was how horrified she was at your powerlessness when he takes over you, and also I think that's why she's so scared of you sacrificing yourself. Is her hero worship, which is perhaps not the right term for it, but I think it comes close. There's a chink in that armor now, and I think that terrifies her. And I think she also talks a little bit about how she's having to grapple with her own lack of agency sometimes in situations, which makes sense coming off of Garlemald and the orphans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to an extent that's always been her story, right? Even with Gaboo, even with Coils, I totally think you're right.
That's true. Yeah, she has to come to face with the fact that her grandfather's gone, and then obviously that's a well. I think on the first, a lot of it was learning to accept what she can't change and learning to fight for what she can.
100%. I totally agree. And one of the things I really like is how much the way in which they split up in Shadowbringers is not a Alfie, and Ali say having a fallout or something. It's just a recognition of the different ways they engage with helping people.
Exactly.
And I think you see that played to its ultimate fruition in that scene in Garlemald where they're sat side by side and talking to each other about just how much they recognize the strengths in each other without having to pretend like they're not different.
Yeah, the Garlemald section is, as we've said previously, just an incredible source of growth for both of those characters.
And much like Endwalker, right, incredible source of growth while also being an incredible just catharsis and not obviously not final note, right? It's still one step in the journey, but it does feel like a climax of everything that's come before.
No, I agree.
One of the things we didn't say is which one did you pick when you first played Endwalker?
Estinian.
I picked Alfino mostly, I think, because Alfino was the first character I really remembered meeting in 14. He was one of the first characters that struck to me. So there was this feeling of coming full circle with him. I also, because I started in Ul'dah, I could have also picked Thancred.
Yeah. Actually, I don't think it was Estinian. I think it was Ishtola. And then I went and watched the Estinian one after because I'd heard of the boots and everything involved with that. But I mean, that's really interesting that you say that because I was a Limsa first player, and if I chose Ishtola, that makes sense, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, that would, yeah, it's coming full circle there. I guess it's kind of sad that if you're a Gridania player, you don't really have any kind of option for fulfilling that other than, I guess, picking someone like Alfino.
Yeah, but yeah, you don't really get that, do you? It's a shame. It does feel a lot like the Uldar start is the canon start to me.
It really does. The other thing about Ul'dah being the canon start is that every time they put out promotional material where they show the 2.0 Warrior of Light or trailers or things, they always show him starting in Ul'dah. So look, if anyone out there wants to be like, no, it's Limsa or this is Grenada because of this or that, or I just know I really don't want it to be Ul'dah, that's fine. I just think if I was to, based on material evidence, suggest one, I think Ul'dah makes the most sense, and I think it doubly makes the most sense when you think about the cadence and story of 2.x and how you starting in Ul'dah makes 2.55 and the banquet and stuff kind of feel like not I don't want to say more resonant, but like a conclusion to where you started from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there.
Next, we have Alphino, who is kind of who also uses flow and is a continuation, kind of the same sentiments as Elise. Where instead of talking about Xenos, though, he's more talking about Julius, Euless, and Quintus, and then almost more than any of the other characters, really communicating. We have been on this journey for so long, and I have said thank you in 1,001 ways, and I'm sorry that I don't have anything else to say, but I hope that this still matters. So thank you again.
I almost see this whole exchange with Alphino as not only, but partially a demonstration of how he has matured as, for want of a better word, a politician.
100% agreed.
Right, the thinking man. And also a reflection on the horrors of war that he's now lived through in a more profound sense.
There is a real sense that Alphino, this is an intangible thing. I think if I really sat down and looked at all of Shadowbringers and all of Endwalker, I could maybe more articulate this better. There's a real sense that he has come into true adulthood in Endwalker in a way that, not that he's not incredibly mature, not that he's not an adult in Shadowbringers, not that he's not all those things, but there is just a sense of, it's not even quite authority, but definitely I do totally agree with you on that.
Almost like an ideological maturity,
Yeah, yeah, a certainness of his course, his path.
a certainness and a consideredness.
Yes, yeah. Then we have Estinian, whose theme is the Heavensward theme. The twins visited him and he fled to get away from them to us, which is, I find is very cute. It is really interesting how much these are all similar, but also the level to which some of them are more cute or more played straight is a little varied.
I agree with you. They managed to slip in the last with Estinian, but then I also think they deliver a really powerful piece about how Estinian is breaching his sort of self-enforced solitude.
Yes. And they echo this both in Ultimate Thule when he gives his sacrifice, but also in his conversations with Vritra all throughout. But that idea that he is, I may not fully understand every aspect of our fight. I may not be the thinking man. I may be the spear on the front line, but I see your willingness to make the world better. And I choose to fight by your side. And I choose to be a part of this. And I choose to be with you. And I trust you. And I think it's also, really well communicated when that starts in 5.55 where he, or I think it's 5.5 or 5.55 where he has that line where he first joins us as a scion. He says, but I look to all of you and the change that you have completed, the change that you have been able to enact just by dint of choosing to believe and trying to fight for a better world. And how could I not be inspired by that?
Right, exactly. And it's such a change from the and a gradual change. It's been developed and built up, but it is such a change from the Estinian that we see earlier on in his arc.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why Endwalker for me, my favorite Insignia, not just for a ton of reasons, but getting to the point where him riding on Vritra and standing defense of home united together with utter earnestness and being the one to push for a child of the first brood to fight to take up his role, to take up his cause, all of that, to get to a point where that is as cathartic as it is because of what has happened in Heaven's Word and to an extent Stormblood and in the background in Shadowbringers is just, it's good emotions.
Is it controversial to believe that Endwalker Estinian is the best Estinian? Because that doesn't seem like it should be controversial.
Yeah, I guess I say that it's like it shouldn't be shocking, right? But I have to wonder if someone out there doesn't love, like, I kind of miss my broody man. Not that he's not still broody, but maybe he's a little too fun now.
Oh, that's a shame. If so.
I'm sure it's the minority, but to everyone their dispositions and loves. But he's the only one who comes into our room, so which is hysterical. And he's like, if Alfino asks, I wasn't here, and then Dragoon leaps out of our window.
Yeah, that was like for our benefit, right? The whole that's not practical. That was just to show off to us.
I mean, how is that any less ostentatious than just walking out? Right? He's gonna draw attention to himself no matter what.
Yeah, he was that was flirting. I choose to believe.
Then we get Y'shtola, whose theme is the Matoya's cave theme, which I mean makes sense for Matoya.
Right.
but she basically comes in for like an Aether check because of what happened on the first, but then also fighting Zodiark. We would have basically been surrounded and influenced by an insane amount of astral Aether. So it makes sense why she would try to check on us.
Right, everyone's checking on us in a certain way, right? But it almost feels like Astrologer is taking the most direct path there. You know, she is, for want of a better word, mothering us almost in this scene. Whereas everyone else is expressing concern. Astrologer is like, I'm in here, I'm checking you. Do this, do this, do this. Don't do this.
Which is very much in her character, right? And also to have like an analytical reason to come check on us first and foremost before the emotional.
Yeah, which I think is true, but also partially, like a cover.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I was just about to ask, do you think so? And I totally feel that. She also, though, does something that is a conversation point that me and you have had for a long time. She references if only Reen was here. And I think that is yet one more element of them alluding to that whole idea of Ystola's obsession with recreating a bridge to the first. I don't think like that element by her just saying that is like, oh, that's clearly what it is. But more like it does feel like an utterly unnecessary reference, and because throughout 6.0 and 5.x, they've been building up her desire to figure out a way to bridge the reflections, or at the very least, the first and source. And not to spoil for anyone who's playing 6.x currently, but 6.x is also not just with source in the 13th, but with other elements besides, is she still very much on that train.
Right, exactly, and it builds because also the theme, the fact that they've given her Matoya's theme, which just makes sense in general, but also the fact that at the end of 4. So not 4.0, what's it? Point oh, she steps into the role of Matoya almost. She takes up residence at the Empty Tower. She becomes its pseudo custodian. She starts to build on Matoya's research to do this.
Yeah, she really inherits the role. Starts to inherit the role. I guess Matoya is still alive.
Oh yeah, but she's definitely retiring on like a Thavnarian beach at some point.
Oh my god, that would be I would pay money to just see Matoya visits us on the island sanctuaries.
And she's got a whole crowd of frogs with her.
Oh my god, yeah, just all 20 of the minions are Parago.
Yes.
Oh, dude, okay, I kinda wanted that now.
Yeah, me too.
I am very interested to see if they do go about, because they established, right, with the role quests and Shadowbringers, that the first and the 13th are also able to be connected. The veil between those two can be broken apart, which means that the 13th effectively could act as a terminus to the other reflections, because the walls between it and the other reflections seem to be quite weak. And I really think that's where they're heading.
Right. Well, that's certainly possible. That would make sense, actually. But I do wonder if it's that the walls are weak or it's that mages have had more reason to call upon the 13th throughout history.
It's true. Though you'd think, like, think about the efforts that the Exarch goes to have to summon us to the first. Clearly, the boundary between the source and the first is incredibly strong. And the fact that mages can learn to do voidal tears from source to 13th means that barrier between the 13th and the source isn't as strong.
Right.
And the fact that the first, there's mages on the first, thanks to the mage caster role quest, we know that you can hop into the 13th from the first. It would just make a lot of sense, especially with current plot elements going as they are.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it would, yeah.
But that is a conversation for another day. On to Thancred, whose theme is Sultana Dreaming, which is the theme from Ul'dah Night,
Yes.
and has been used since 1.0, I believe. And I mean, honestly, his main thing is just I need to defend my daughter. I need to make sure she can't even fight for herself, and I need to make sure that the first does not fall. But also, if I'm being stupid, make sure to bop me in the ear if I'm being silly.
Yeah, that's absolutely the core of it. I think to extend it a little further, it's him speaking on the nature of fatherhood, of friendship, and of the burdens and the benefits that both of these things grant you.
100%. We were going to get a little bit when we head back to the first before we go to Elpis. A reminder about the fate of not even just our own star. It is a really important reminder. It also, I think without winking too much, it's not even really a nudge and a wink, but his dialogue on if I'm not being pragmatic, make sure to stop me. It really does end up hearkening and connecting into his actions as being the first one to sacrifice himself for Ultima Thule,
Yes.
but it without feeling like retroactively like, oh man, they were really telegraphing that.
No, that's definitely true. I think if they were telegraphing it at any point, they were doing it with Vritra.
Yeah, totally. And then the final one is Graha, whose theme is his version of the Eternal Winds from FF3 and also in the Crystal Tower and all that.
This might be controversial. This is my least favorite of them.
I'm not surprised you said that. I'm curious to hear why.
It just didn't feel like it had quite the height. It felt like the other ones felt like a culmination of a story. Graha's felt like just more Graha, which is good. I like more Graha, but it doesn't feel as much of a crescendo of a character arc. It feels like an old, like someone who has felt the weight of an entire world on their shoulders before stepping up and offering, an understanding, so someone else who can understand our position.
I 100% agree. And I agree that it's good. It's not bad. And it's not like, oh, it's the weakest because it's not good. It's because it is more Graha. And I think part of that is he only joined us in 5.3. Like, yes, there's the X Arc in 5.0, but Scion Graha does not exist in the real sense that that character does until 5.3. I also think that they have to save a lot of what could have been said there for his sacrifice in Ultima Thule. And so because of that, I think that moment is he doesn't do a request to go on an adventure, all that stuff there. It's saved for later. So I definitely agree. It is more Graha. It's understandable why it's mostly just more Graha. And if you're a really big Graha fan, and a lot of you I know are, but Eh, and I love Graha. He's probably one of my favorite sounds, which actually makes me sad that we don't get Urianger, who's also one of my favorite sounds, for a conversation. I guess we got a conversation with him on Mare, right? Like that was our.
I was thinking about saying exactly the same thing earlier, and then I realized, we got that experience already on Mare. Not that I wouldn't have liked more of it, but
I mean, I'll always take Morianje. But I feel like there's something to appreciate though, right? In that obviously not everything can crescendo when the song has only begun. And the fact that that makes the fact that all the other characters get to crescendo and this journey you've been on with them, in some ways, even more poignant rather than making Graha feel weaker for me.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely not a weak scene. That there's no way it's a weak scene. It's just not as strong as the other scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's all of the interactions there. Any final thoughts about that little section?
I really enjoyed it, but besides that, not particularly.
I guess the thing I would say is it's really smart of them to place that there because you're right about to head into the final days, and there is not going to be a real chill moment for a while. And then after that, you're separated them for all of Elpis. So effectively, you have one of the most intense moments of all expansions for a couple hours, and then you're disconnected from your friends for a couple hours. So to have a moment where you can really hit that nail on the head for a little bit, especially to a Scion that you might be particularly close to, I think is really relevant.
Yeah, and I think if you're deep into like role playing out your character, which I'm not necessarily one of those people in such a deep regard, but I think it might provide you a rationale to keep in your mind for why your character is not giving in to the despair and it is constantly moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So the next scenes we get are the role quest transformations, basically with Alamigo and Ishgard. And there's cameos for both of those. With the cameos in the back you see Jruntia, not surprisingly, but actually one thing I noticed this time is that he is with the dancer teacher Neshmira in Alamigo. And then in Ishgard, you've got Sidurgu with Riel from the Dark Knight quest line, as well as Aaronville.
Of course, of course. I mean, Zuran and Nashmira are just discussing how they both fucked Falaman. But
Definitely true. That's just factual. I will hear no umbrage there, or at the very least, how they want to.
that's true. Yeah, you might be right there. They do a great job with cameos in this expansion in general.
I mean, like, there's some of the obvious scenes, right? You've got the coming together of the Ilsabardian contingent. Like, of course, there's going to be a fuck ton of cameos. But I love the amount to which all the job quest people are just in the background of scenes, sometimes for like a couple frames. Like, Droon and Najmira are in for literally a second, like 1 second of footage.
Yeah, it's a good thing that they are very, very eye catching.
Yeah, exactly. Main thing that made me catch her is I recognized her like purple blouse, but then also she had her chakram. So I was like, oh wait, oh it's her.
Yes, yeah. And we also see the Monk Quest NPCs in Limsa as you're leaving.
Yes. Oh, so we see samurai. I think you see Momozigo with one of the pugilist Lalafels, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, that would make sense.
One of the things I really like about the scene, I think this is a really smart way to take a second to be incredibly foreboding, but also show the world state outside of where we are, and also set up the role quests because the two of the people who are transforming in those are directly tied to two of the role quests, which are what the caster for Ishgard and the healer for El Amigo.
Yeah, yeah. The healer one is very tied in with Fodola and Arenvald and stuff.
Yeah, as well with Fordola's short stories and stuff actually do fill out a little bit even more of that character's story.
They do, yes, that's true.
I think we're not going to talk too in depth about role quests, except for when they come up. At least not until maybe like the end.
Yeah, we said we were going to do one of these on the roll quest, right?
Yeah, but I do want to just say, like, did you have a particular favorite role quest, or like, did you have one that spoke to you most? I believe, like, when we've talked about in the past, it was healer.
Yeah, I'd say it's still healer for this one, which is interesting because it was tank for Shadowbringers.
For me, it's either tank or healer. Like, the thing is, tank, I think, as a story, might be the strongest one for me in Shadowbringers, but healer is just got so much good characterization.
Yeah, it's true. You know me, I'm a bitch for world building, and the tank one does a great job of that in
Yeah, with
Shadowbringers.
Vobert.
Yeah,
The thing about the like role quest and Endwalker is I like all of them. I think my least favorite's probably Caster. The thing is, I like a lot of the things around it. I like the things with the Amharic, people of the religious faith. I like certain elements, but the actual primary guy and his nature of existence and how he came to be is it's not like, oh, it's weird for 14, but it just kind of feels out of left field and a lot to explain for just a role quest to do instead of just doing I don't know. For me that one worked the weakest, but it's still good.
yeah, I know. I think that's absolutely fair. I don't dislike any of them. The caster one didn't particularly drag me in. A lot of what the melee DPS one got me on was excitement about the future more than the actual quest itself.
Same. I was about to say, like, I like that quest good enough for just its story, but with the things with Lorenz and even just more Merlwyb, all of that harkens onto a lot of New World stuff that I'm totally with you. It's very exciting. For the raw story, it's probably between ranged with Izanami with Endoma or healer.
Yeah, the Izanami stuff is good. The Gotetsu stuff is good.
And I think there's something about the way of them handling grief and the celebration and the ceremony. There's a climax to that one that I think its culmination is as strong, maybe the strongest of any of them with that cutscene, and that's probably one of the reasons that it worked for me so well.
I think you're probably right. I think the ending of the caster one is no, sorry, not the caster one. The ending of the range one is better, but the midpoint of the healer one is better.
I think that's fair. Okay, moving on to the next scenes, which just all of this is just so the music, everything, the ambient sound, not music that's going on is just so eerie and foreboding. Before we dive in, I want to ask, what were you thinking and feeling during this time when you were first going through?
Probably equal parts dread and excitement.
Mm-hmm.
I got the vibe definitely that this was going to be something fucked up.
Yeah, no surprises there. That's the thing though, is like we've only just seen the Medion. We don't even know it's Medion yet, but the last free thing, and then the final days beginning. But we still don't really understand what or why or what's about to happen. And so for me, I would agree, like equal parts dread and excitement to know what's going to happen next. But what the fuck is going on?
Well, I think that especially works for the people who really get into the lore, because if you don't, you might just think, oh, it's just going to be the same thing as Amarat, which, vaguely it is. But we're thinking, well, creation magic doesn't exist. It can't just go wild. So what's going to happen here?
Yep. Which I think is the way they do handle it ultimately is brilliant because okay, they can't use creation magics, but as a byproduct, the reason that you can't use creation magics is because you're sundered entities, which makes you more vulnerable. And I think that what an inspired way to have things play out the same yet different.
Yes. And it kept you guessing for, well, until Ishtola speaks to you.
Yeah. The map darkens over Thavnair and the final days begin as the sky burns. So we see Thavnair overrun already by Terminus beasts, and we get the lines from Emmett. Leaving naught in their wake but ash, sun scorches earth and boils seas, and our sins ascend unto the heavens. Three dooms to unmake all we were. Which are the lines from the Amarat dungeon, which is just another example of the Emmett lines actually often hearkening onto something that's already been addressed or talked about elsewhere, but giving it even either a further reference or a further dive in.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, there are obvious reasons as to why they would call back to it, right? It makes perfect sense.
I mean, but basically, we arrive to a war zone, and it's just the sky burns, creature, terminus beasts are everywhere, and just imagine, right? You are in a thing where you are physically in danger and emotionally in danger, for lack of a better way of putting it. Where if you don't focus on survival physically, you're gonna die. But if you don't make sure you're calm and level headed, you're gonna suffer even a worse fate and transform into a terminus beast. But also, none of these people are aware what the fuck is going on. From their standpoint, imagine you're walking down the street, going to the store. All of a sudden, the sky turns red, and the guy next to you, was just in the middle of crying for some reason, turns into a giant monster, and you're just like, "What the
Right. It's the worst possible version of the stock market crash. Instead of like jumping out of windows, the bankers are turning into demons. Help.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, the bankers are turning into demons. I need that on a shirt. But yeah, so Awan explanation is terrifying. Just imagine that situation. So there's a lot of times I think this gets confused. Even I get this confused sometimes because the language around it kind of oscillates and is weird. But so blasphemies are the big guys, and terminus beasts are the small guys. However, terminus beasts are also sometimes used as a term for blasphemies as well. So terminus beast is a catch-all, but he does specifically delineate that the blasphemy. He says terms like when referring to Zavar Banu that the blasphemy and its minions. Like he refers to the other smaller terminus beasts as separate or as not just being blasphemy.
Yeah, it sort of reads to me as, all imps are void sent, but not all void center imps type
Yeah,
vibe.
it's just interesting because you have a specific language, and they do also harken onto this in the roll quest with a similar language. But just the fact that they delineated it once again here with R1 maybe wanted to point it out.
Yeah, definitely. It's useful to have because at very first blush, it was a bit, well, not confusing isn't quite the correct term, but I appreciated the clarification at the time.
And so we're headed into Vanaspati, which, if you guys aren't aware, is the northern section of Thavnair, and also where the anchorite of Corvos, one of its foot, should be. Sadly, I don't think there's any imagery you can see in the dungeon that is the foot, but I'm hoping that one day when we go to actual Corvos, we'll see that Corvosi foot.
You want to see Kovosi feet?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. You know me, I'm all about them stone feet.
Yeah, so Vanaspati is a term that refers to basically plants, but like the wilderness. I think it literally means Lord of the Forest, but it's used to refer to like the taxonomic category of plants nowadays in Indian languages.
Oh, I had no idea. So, speaking of names, though, we have Svar Banu, who is in a certain deity associated with eclipses, and who is the blasphemy form of Kalzal, who you actually meet earlier on in the MSQ when you first go to Thavner.
Yes, yeah, certainly. He's the Ara who hangs out with Matsya. Well, doesn't hang out with Matsya, the guy who is going bankrupt and has to fire Matsya.
Do you have any thoughts as to why you think, before we go further, why you think certain people become blasphemies over others? Because they kind of have, it's really just the amount of despair tends to be the implication.
That's a good question, right? Because narratively, you would think that it would also include, if Thancred was to fall, no matter the amount of despair, you would think because of his personal power, he'd turn into one.
Well, do you think so though? Because think about it, your Aether is obliterated, and they're only sourced on Dynamis effectively. So because of that, I guess it would be the amount of emotion would be really the core feature more than anything else because of how Dynamis interacts with emotion.
But does that really hold up? Because Kalzak goes bankrupt and turns into a blasphemy, but like you see people like see their family getting eaten in front of them and they just turn into a normal one.
Well, and that's exactly why I'm wondering. I wonder if you can you accrue one of the things that if you look at everyone who does become a blasphemy though, is that they despaired for a long time. Zal was brokenhearted and things were getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And you look at the Izanami girl and her husband died a while ago. And you look at the amount of time that Honey Senna's friend was in the woods alone and disconnected and brokenhearted. You look at the amount that the queen of the Sahagin had been brokenheartedly feeling like her children were dying and being swayed the wrong direction for a long, long time. Maybe that's the key. Maybe the key is that it's not just the amount of despair in a moment, but the length of time that has seeped into you.
That could be it, man. The science of Dynamis is truly a mystery.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's getting more clear. I will say, if any of you guys have started doing the recent tribal quests, that has not cleared anything up. There's not really been new information, but just more data points has like really helped be like, okay, this thing that we think is the case seems to definitely be the case. Which is primarily that unless you are in a realm completely comprised of Dynamis, and even if you are, Dynamis is a thing that you affect with emotion rather than controlling by manipulating like Aether. It responds to emotion. It is not emotion, and emotion interweaves and interweaves with it more so than it is emotion itself.
Right, yeah. That's absolutely the impression I get.
And that's repeated multiple times in 6.0 in multiple ways, as well as implied and clarified in all throughout 6. Not so much 6.x, but certain side contents in 6.x.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So Vanaspati is horrifying.
Yeah, you beat me to it. It is truly. I still remember that the most horrifying. I mean, the two most horrifying moments for me in the game in Singularity is Tesleen, but that's also like because Tesleen, that scene for me is just hits a lot of specific like idiosyncrasies I have for horror, but also Venispati, the moments when the flayed elephant, when the terminus beast turns around, it's like the flayed meat beast, and you see the Arcosodra face on the back of it of what was once children is just.
Yeah, the second boss, right? Yeah, it's grisly, it's gory, it's horrible.
Well, and you know what else they do to make it more horrible is that you like the mouth boss, right? I forget if he's the first or second, but I think he's the first.
He's the first.
It's not just, oh, this horrific monstrosity of nightmares. It's also he uses the mouth attacks, and the mouths are like, help me, I'm hurting, I'm in pain. It is not just horror and violence. It is sorrow and heartbreak and tragedy, and it's ugh.
Yeah, I do want to say they really latch onto it with the Terminus Beast, but the centipede design that they repeat with Sfarabanu, it really is very effective. That like creepy mask.
I would love to, because that idea of masks and imagery like that, you see that exist in like centipedes make sense, right? It's not even, it's kind of centipedial. It's a weird design, but the amount that centipedes show up in Shinto imagery or in Japanese imagery all the time as makes total sense. And also we saw them in.
Sekiro.
Yeah, well, yeah, Sekiro not least of all. I was trying to not reference Sekiro because that's the easiest one to go to, but yeah. But you even think about things like the use of masks in something like Bleach, even like this repetition of broken cursed things and masks, and I mean part of that's also because of the legacy of cursed masks, also in Japanese mythology as well. I'm sure.
Well, if you take a pause and Google Rangda, Rangda, it's a Balinese demon, and the mask really reminds me of
Oh yeah,
Bali is a Hindu island in Indonesia, very Indianized, so it would make sense that might be some link there.
I'm sure. And the thing is that there's a lot of use of myths and imagery from that, both in primal names and summons and all sorts of stuff, even prior to Thavner and Endwalker. Like Final Fantasy as a whole has done that a lot, so it wouldn't shock me at all. Yeah, I super see that, especially with the tusks and all of that. It makes me wonder if because that creature existed in a form of that, not quite that exact model, right? But a version of that kind of exists in Amarot with like the shorter truncated versions. I wonder if that design. I wonder if the adaptation for Svarbanu is an extension of that design, or if they had that in mind prior.
That's an interesting idea. It's Meteon's OC, do not steal.
God damn it, Niniri. I would like I can look, there are a lot of people who work at Square Enix that I would fucking love to interview, but I can tell you that like the concept artists or the people working in the art department and asking them what their inspirations for things were directly, rather than just like hazarding a guess what the associations are, would be fascinating.
Right, because there's a very profound internal logic behind this kind of stuff that you see extended to stuff like etymology and even ability names that the bosses use. That they are very layered, they are very purposeful. So yeah, I would imagine that this design has. I mean, it slaps, but also beyond that, I would imagine that there is some intent with carrying it through into this boss.
That actually reminds me, the in Ultima Thule, and this has happened all throughout 14, but just specifically in Ultima Thule, you have the little islands are called like Ostrakhan, right? And Ostrakhan are the shards of a pot shard using used as a writing surface. It's like such a specific idea, and yet I can't help but wonder for the localization team, or like, is it the Japanese team in Japanese named it as like Ostrakhan, and the English just localized it and was like, oh okay, or was there a concept in Japanese that existed? Who has the archaic dictionary is my question, because sometimes there are word choices where I'm like, you're not going to find that in a normal dictionary. I know I looked, and someone had to have known this word in order for them to come up with it at all. So I'm wondering who found this.
Well, Astrakhan are very important historically, like for an archaeologist, and the people of on these teams obviously love history, deeply love history. That's very, very clear. I think both on the localization team and on the writing team. So I would assume that there is a general awareness of it, but I don't think Astrakhans are particularly common in Japan.
I wouldn't imagine, especially because the writing systems for especially kanji and stuff don't show up until the point at which they're going to have paper forms of paper are pretty readily accessible, and also because it's you've got the Chinese writing system, especially early on, only the like hyper educated are even going to be able to, unless there's like an early form of kana that I'm not thinking of or something.
Well, right, but by the time that the Japanese, the Yamato people arrive in Japan, China's already got paper and Korea's already got paper. So,
Exactly.
so and actually, the really ancient Chinese writing is mostly done on bone. So that, I guess.
It really caught my eye because, and this is yet another good example of like their, what I love about their design stuff is, I'm looking at the map for Ultimate Thule, I'm like, why are they all called Ostrakhan? Because it was a word I had not heard before up to that point. And part of this is also, this may be a word that plenty of people know, and I'm just ignorant of this one specific one, but it felt
No,
like an
no,
archaic word. And then to go look at it, it's like, oh, a pot shard using as a writing surface, especially when you think about the shards of these worlds that are epitaphs to what these worlds once were. And it's such a perfect evocative choice. I just love it.
no. It absolutely is. It's fantastic. They are shards of a world that have been scribed upon this surface as a, like you said, an epitaph. That's the perfect word for them.
Not to spoil it at all, but like the new news tribal quest is wonderful, and I really fucking appreciate what it is, and it was almost made for me in terms of it's just really really wonderful. It's interesting because there's something about the fundamental tragedy of Ultima Thule in when you first arrive that I don't know if it's like melancholy porn for me or what, and we'll talk about more of that in the future, but there's just something about this idea that if Ultima Thule was truly intractable in terms of ever being able to change, other than to like hold the line and defeat Medion, but after that it's kind of just doomed to fade away from here. There's something about that that I kind of appreciate in that sometimes things are interminable,
Right.
but at the same time, I do appreciate their choice to also choose to write a hope narrative about what happens when you are the remnants of what is left behind and what can you make of that and of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to draw upon, especially coming from a, like a Japanese origin as well,
Mm.
and how they regard certain aspects of the afterlife and stuff like that. Also, the tribal mount is really good,
Yeah, the tribal mount is very, very good.
and they're very cute. The little guys, the little like diving suit guys.
Oh, Gerbluffs.
Yeah, Gribblus, that's it.
Yeah. When they first opened their face window and it's like, oh, you're a fucking cat. It's so good. Also, just every one of those, not to make this a Tribal Quest recording, but the jamming way just has a freaking banger of a line at every single one of those quests. It's like, did you just try to kill my barista?
Yeah, that was good. I do. I think this game does really well with the. If you've never played the Travel Quest, if you play like any of them, I think they're all worth playing.
Yes. I think for the most part, it basically is they got better as they went along. I think ARR is the weakest by far, but they're still worth playing, especially if you're only going to play one, at least play the Ixali one.
Yeah, the Exali one is good. But I'm also a big soft spot of the Amalja one.
Yes, the Emulsion one's definitely got some interesting narrative stuff in it too. I would say that at least starting with Stormblood, I would call them all just good, really good, even in and of themselves without any caveat.
Yes.
The first two expansions are a little hit or miss, but they're still absolutely worth doing. But Stormblood on, and especially Shadowbringers, and so far especially Endwalker, you absolutely should do.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Well, I guess since it's Endwalker podcast, we should say that I will say about the ARR one more than any that if you want to fully enjoy Endwalker to its absolute fullest, do all of the Realm Reborn ones because it makes 5.5 hit a lot harder. And I guess Heaven's Word, they also show up, the Vonu and stuff show up. So I would say I would just do all of them, but especially do all of a Realm Reborn and Heaven's Word if you want certain aspects of the very end of the patch content of Shadowbringers and the very end of Endwalker to hit harder. And I mean, assuming you're already played Endwalker at this point, if you're listening to this, but I will say, if you're going to play it a second time, definitely go do that first.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that the Amalja thing resonates with me so hard is that it really reinforces the tempering curing story.
Yeah, that's a good point. I really think that the Amalja, almost more than any of the other groups, does a really good job of conveying, not just the tribal quests, but just any of their side quests and everything associated with them, really does a good job of communicating how fucking, not just intractable, but how dour and dire tempering really is on an existential level to Eorzea as a whole. Like, because it always feels like a danger, a worry, of things, but feeling like, no, my brother got tempered and I had to mercy kill him because there's literally just no other option. You can try to keep them, but inevitably they're going to try to break out and they're either going to kill you or they're going to temper other people. Like, there's literally, and I think, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean the Amalja one ends with a daughter having to kill her mother because she's tempered.
Does she actually kill him? It's really ambiguous.
I took it as kill. I took it that way.
I mean, we don't see her again, so maybe you're right.
Yeah, I mean she doesn't. She's not named up in the allied quest, so I mean I feel maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, it's pretty ambiguous, but because it kind of seems like they leave her behind. But the other thing I'll say is, imagine a world in which we get a side quest during 6.x, where just if you've done that, you get a little thing where you can go cure her tempering, or you imagine you just see them around the world together, or like you're in the Amalja encampment and you see her mother there, just out of nowhere.
That would be awesome.
I would love little touches, little details.
Yes, completely.
So this is kind of like the final moment that we're going to talk about for today, but this is a scene that is incredibly important to me in terms of really everything we've said about how horrific the final days is. Everything we've said about how horrific the imagery and all that stuff is true. But there's something about what we're going to find out right here that is, I think, to me, maybe the most terrifying and truly gut wrenching part of the final days, because what we find out from Y'shtola is that she doesn't see them because there's no aether. There's no aether where they are. They are just beings of dynamis made manifest and despair rooting it around them. And what we discover is that their souls, their aether, is decayed, corrupted, and effectively destroyed. Which means that in a world in which you can turn into a monstrosity, in a world in which you can die in horrendous ways, in the ways that there's all these heartbreaks, at least there's some peace in the idea that you will return to the ethereal sea and you will either your soul reincarnate or it will be the grounds for a new soul. The whole idea of flow, of answers, of the small comfort that at least this journey does not end is one of the major rooted comforts and ideas in this world and in this story. And the idea that these characters will never have that. They're just gone. There's nothing left of them other than their heartbreak. And even once the terminus beast or blasphemy is dead, so is that. And that is just, ugh.
Yeah, exactly. The perhaps this is not immediately apparent to someone who's not been into like aetherology and stuff, but that's the person is gone, not just in like their dead sense. The person is deleted in every sense that we understood at the time from the world.
They are that's really the way to put it. They are effectively deleted from existence, including their memories, anything about them. Because the thing is if you die in 14, your aether, your soul returns, but your aether can leach out as well as your memories can leach out into the surviving environment. You are survived by the world to some extent, and if if your soul is incarnated into a new body, a self gets to live on. But with this, just you're just gone. There's no hope. There's no change. Your last moment of existence is to terribly transform into a monstrosity, and then that's it. That is your legacy. There's nothing else.
Yeah, and I mean the sorry, that was a very beautiful like speech, but I couldn't stop thinking about how when you said your aether lives on, I couldn't stop thinking about how if you die in a like earth aether rich environment and your body isn't moved, you turn into a slime.
Right? Yeah. Or how fucking your eyes can turn into the heck eyes.
Oh god, yeah, X-Eyes.
But no, I just it's a point that I really want to hit on because as someone where that kind of existential dread of utter oblivion, hits me hard in the real world, seeing 14 as this background element provides this idea of there is some comfort. I mean, it's literally one of the primary songs. The final song of this expansion is Hydaelyn conveying that it's going to be okay, even should your journey end, it will continue on. And that is even taken away from them. And I just can't emphasize enough how much I think that is horrendous.
Right. We get the callback also that I think it's important that Stoller mentions or mentions that they are utterly and 100% objectively incurable, and we're riding this high off of curing tempering, right? And we're like, even though they've said, we're probably not going to be able to cure the upper stages of tempering,
Yeah, physical corruption, kinda you're boned at that point.
but even then, like we're thinking like it's not impossible, and we're curing the empty. Nothing's irreversible. We can change stuff back. We can make repairs, and then we come across this thing that there is no coming back from.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because they're not the Aether's gone. There's Dynamis. You can't manipulate that Dynamis effectively. Okay, here's one thing I wonder. And there's been no hints to this at all as of yet. Because Meteon can control the Dynamis winds and draws the Dynamis onto herself in Ultima Thule, I wonder if the emotions of those turned into Terminus beasts could be drawn onto Ultima Thule and converted into beings. I don't think so, and part of my reason why is that, remember, part of the reason that the people of the Theris can be turned into Terminus beasts is because of their sundered nature. The other creatures of the other stars were not sundered beings, so it's not even clear the extent to which they even became like, if you in the final days, right, or the dead ends. Sorry, not the final days. You do see the Gerbluffs turn into Terminus beasts, but that's it. I think because you don't see the Corellians, you don't see Rala and those guys become it at all.
Right, and the Amratines didn't become Terminus Beast. Their creation magic went wild, and they essentially created Terminus Beast, but they
Yeah.
they didn't become them, right? So I wonder if there's a lot of questions to be thought about how special and dense the Aether of our star is, because it does seem to be pretty dense. But then again, I mean, like the Grubluffs were living in a utopic society as well, so
Well, and it's interesting though, right? Because the only people with creation magic seem to be the ancients, and then that makes them kind of markedly unique. But then at the same time, the dragons like Midgard Summer were also incredibly powerful. Now Midgard Summer's weird because he was basically the greatest of them all. So only small bit of hope on a hope is that if Medion did manage to draw the dynamis of those to destroyed on Atheris to her, that perhaps maybe something is left of their emotions. But seeing as with all the Terminus beasts, it seems that the only emotion that's left is negative, anyways.
I don't think we'd want that, right? That would be a nasty end.
Yeah.
That would almost be a sick twist, right? Like you don't get to go to the live stream, but your worst emotions get to live on in cold space.
Yeah. To be fair, the tribal quest proves that the concept that even though all that can be left is your worst emotions, those emotions can actually change and grow once the song of hope began and the song of despair ended. Because we have beings like the dragons and the Gerbluffs and stuff, people who had given in, who were just despair made manifest, right? The Ea, who were despair made manifest in terms of what they were able to begin to do hope for a better world.
That's true, but I almost see them as more complete than the shattered remains that we've already killed of the Terminus beasts.
I agree. I think they're gone. I think that in terms of thinking through, is there any possibility of anything? And I think I'm totally with you. I think,
I think we could get like a whisper on the wind or something.
yeah. But yeah, it's a really unnerving scene too. How it's played out with Y'shtola, like because it doesn't play very slow, but it plays a little bit slow. Of Y'shtola, like it's gone, isn't it? And then you get through it, and everyone's just quiet for a moment as they contemplate the gravity of what this all means.
Right, and Ishtola herself is extremely perturbed by it, very, very deeply perturbed by what she's seeing, understandably. Oh well, by what she's not seeing, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Reacher arrives and heartbroken. I mean, his people are dying, becoming a monster. He's having to slay his own people. Like when you get into Vanaspati and like you're fighting the Terminus beasts that are attacking him, and he doesn't want to kill his own.
You know what his relationship with Arawan in this moment makes me think? It makes me want to see like a clip of the Dravani and Ishkadian civilization,
Yeah,
like one of the kings talking to Nidhogg or to Hrsvelgor or Ratatoska, perhaps more likely.
I mean, we've talked about this before in other lore talks and stuff, but I'll tell you what. Usually, I'm all about like, look, don't use time travel. They've gotten away with it so far because they've nailed the execution enough to be like, okay, it's fine. I don't want more time travel, but at the same time, boy, would I love to see certain places at their heights. Boy, would I love to see like the War of the Magi. Would I love to see events like that? So, I mean, with Echo Visions and stuff,
Yeah, exactly. I'll take an Echo flashback, thanks. I don't need time travel.
yeah. Well, and especially with like Criterion and Variant Dungeons now, there's a lot of room to explore places and locales beforehand of ruins of what was and what is.
Yes, definitely. Well, we've already explored the ruins of the Dravani and Ishkadian castle in
True.
the Eyrie.
Well, but I was also gonna say, imagine the locales rather than just like in the Training Mist. There's the places in the northwestern section of the Dravanian Forelands that it has a bunch of ruins that have vista spots and that talk about them being locations of worship or veneration or communication. There are even ruins still there that could potentially be explored.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm just saying, I would gladly take it.
I'd take it. I'd take it.
So Arwan comes in and tries to convince Vritra, we need you to lead. I know you're pretending to be the defender right now and you're doing a great job, but we people need a symbol to look to. The thing I like in that moment is like I don't think Vritra's reticence is even just a bad tactical move, right? Vritra's kind of right where like there's a chance that if he reveals himself like I've dragons been leading you all along in the middle of the apocalypse, maybe that would incite panic.
Right? Yeah. No, I suppose it would, but then again, dragons are just super cool, right? I think
It's true.
I think
It's
it's a
true.
it's a primordial emotion of humanity that dragons are cool. It's like dinosaurs.
Everyone's got their dragon phase. But yeah, I just like that scene because it doesn't just feel like, oh, Vritra is being a scaredy cat, like afraid to take up his mantle. It's like, no, 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 no. It's like, okay, he has reticence, but his reticence is it's kind of rooted in reasonable points, even if he still does need to take up that mantle.
Right, for many years, the policy that he's sticking to in this moment has worked. He's the problem solver, but the leader is, well, ostensibly the public leader is Ahawan and his ancestors. So it makes sense that he would be like, I mean, that's worked for a long ass time. Why would it not work now?
Yeah, 100%. We're gonna get into it next time, obviously, a lot more, and especially a lot of the even the darker stuff as we go in further. But the Istinian's moment with Vritra here is the it's the prologue to the moments that you're gonna get later with him and Vritra. But like the fact that no one else could convince Vritra to take the actions he does, even Alwan couldn't. But it took Istinian because of what he's been through, because of what he understands about the dragons, not just in fighting them, but in what he's understands from Nidhogg and his ability to change and his ability to grow. And I made an entire video about it, literally when the Endwalker trailer was the only thing that was out. But just like
Yes.
that, that idea of him being able to stand in defense of his home, not just side by side with someone who would have been once his enemy, but truly now doesn't just see them as an ally, but understands him enough to be able to move him to action is just so good.
Well, exactly. And I think that it's interesting that they're able to find common ground specifically because of the experiences that led them to fight against each other, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, it starts back all the way, not just obviously with this Indian story further in, but in Endwalker, that moment where Varshan sees the blood of Nidhogg on his spear, but also sees Ratatosker's armor, right? It's to him, Istinian must be such an enigma, but also there's like this just acceptance and respect that the two have that then gets paid off even greater in some scenes to follow.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that he I just realized I said it's really interesting about this video. Apologies. No, yeah. The reaction that Reacher has is obviously immediately to be guarded around Estinian.
Mhm.
Even speaking to him through a drone, for want of a
Mhm.
better word. And then to move on from that and to be able to talk so frankly and yet compassionately with each other is really awesome writing. And I think the Vritra and Estinian stuff is absolutely the highlight of the final day section of the game for me.
Yeah, highlight's hard, right? Because one, it's such a dour moment, but like, do I call it a highlight that they managed to make horror and heartbreak hit so well? Like, I don't know if I can call that a
Right.
highlight, but also, yeah, I definitely agree. And I think I just remember seeing the trailer and seeing that moment depicted for the first time in the trailer, and just how in the face of utter annihilation, how much hope could still stand was just good fucking shit, man.
It really was good shit. Yeah.
I mean, like, I know I'm being highly articulate right now, but like, it is one of those things where I've made pieces where I've talked about this with lovely, flowery language, but right now I just want to say I fucking love those moments. God damn it.
No, you're absolutely right though. It's excellent and it does so much for both of their characters. And I mean, to be honest, they've done a great job expanding Reacher further than that
Yeah.
in the patches, which I didn't really expect, but they've done a fantastic job of it with Astasha.
Yeah, they really, really have. I'll also say, I don't retroactively, and I think this is already apparent in 6.0, but especially with 6.x, you get even more. Understanding how much Vritra is the baby of the family he is still an elder worm who is wise and stuff, but like his youth in the same way that like Graha can both be, you know, an exarch and have age to him and also have a sense of youth to him. Vritra has a youth to him that, you know, Hraesvelgr doesn't have, Nidhogg did not have, Tiamat did not have. There's that sense of
And Ratatoska didn't have. You know, if you read the testimonies of Ratatoska, she's a nice person, but she was impetuous almost.
yeah, and so his like earnest sincerity, slight apprehension, while also being one of the first brood and incredibly wise, is a really nice element that is easy to miss in 6.0 a little bit because you're thinking of him as like this great worm, the first brood, but then you compare it when you like find out more and more about him in 6.x. You're like, oh, this makes a lot of not just your actions but your temperament make a lot of sense.
Yes, completely. You know, I suppose the closest parallel that we've got would be, I would go out on a branch and say that it probably would have been pre, non-primal Bahamut.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. It's hard to know for sure with characters like Bahamut and Ratatoskr because what we get about them is so much more loose. And like while Bahamut was more of a like earnest good, he also was a leader of Mericidia. Well, I mean like Vritra's leader of
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the thing is that Vritra's like reticence after what happened with Asdaya in during the third has left him kind of not stunted, but still a little bit. He's never quite fully grown out of being the younger brother.
Definitely not. Definitely not. I think you see that with his interactions with Iowan as well, and Justinian, where he
Yeah.
you can see that little younger brother complex in there.
Yeah, and it's a lovely touch, and it's one that you wouldn't necessarily think to expect when you're talking about the 7 greatest worms in existence. But I don't think I don't think it's like it undercuts. I don't think it undercuts his role or undercuts his characterization at all. If anything, it just adds a really interesting extra layer.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's there are many layers in many characters in this expansion.
Shocking!
The characterization is truly fantastic. I have this note, and I'm not sure if it's mentioned in this section or not, but I think it is. I think someone mentioned it in banter that the Fae of the first are they couldn't leave the star. Even if we managed to get some of the people on the first out, the Fae couldn't leave it.
I don't remember where that line's mentioned. I mean, it makes sense. You think about how they're tied to the star too, like their
Right.
existence and their nature.
Exactly. It was saying it was basically saying, even if we managed to get the people out, we wouldn't be able to get the Fae out. We wouldn't be able to get Faeol and the other fairies out and stuff like that. And I just found that fascinating. They're so intrinsically linked to it. I mean, we knew that to a degree. That it goes that far is interesting to me.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of like the whole Tolkienian sense, though, of that connection with like Fae and magic being tied to and of the world. They are like nature, right? More than they are necessarily just like man. And I think that works pretty well for the Pixies when you think about how they're tied to the dreams and the world and the nature of their how their kind of souls function. If you played for to anyone who's played the tribal quests, I mean, I guess I'm with you in that I'm like shocked that they are actually intrinsically linked, or almost no, not even intrinsically, extrinsically linked, effectively. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very interesting note.
I wonder, does that extend to the Numo? It must do, right? If they're saying if they said Fae as a collective.
I guess the pneumo yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder if there are any beings like I guess you can't take the element. You couldn't take the elementals with you,
No, you couldn't. That's true.
you know.
You wouldn't. Would you be able to take the Spriggans? Not the Spriggans.
Mm,
Yeah, the Spriggans. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good question. I wonder how much part of it too is not even just an extrinsic link to the world because of their own nature, but also just the things that they need to exist and survive. Because you think about pixies, I mean, they survive and thrive on dreams partially, and so like you think just as long as there's living beings, they'd be able to engage and interact with it.
Right. Maybe the secret plot there was that whoever said that I can't remember actually. I didn't make note of that, which is hilarious. But whoever did say that, maybe they were just worried that they tend to like carrot elementals or something if they came on the moon.
That or they just really hated pixies, and so they were like, No, no, just not those guys."
Maybe it was Graha and he was jealous of Feoul.
Yeah. uh, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Any final thoughts you want to touch on before we start heading wrapping up?
No, nothing particularly, nothing specific.
Okay, well, it's a good thing that we've handled all the heavy stuff here, and that next episode isn't going to be 2/3 of. I hope you like Vor.
Oh no.
With that said, I have been Elio Forceron,
And I have been Niniri.
and we will see you all next time, guys. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, everyone. Hey all, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, praise the 12 by giving it a like and comment, or by subscribing. It goes a long way to helping the channel. Don't forget, new videos every week, and if you want to engage with us further, why not check out our Discord and Patreon in the link below and become a part of our community. With that said, see you around, fellow Archons.